He sat in the waiting lounge like a shadow stretched too thin, invisible to the world rushing past him in boots, heels, and too loud conversations. Elliot Moore, once the face of innovation, the man who redefined the future, now just another broken body parked near Gate 3, forgotten like the trash under the vending machine. His wheelchair, custom-made and precision-engineered, might as well have been a coffin with wheels. Outside, the snowfall thickened like breath caught in a prayer, silent and slow, blanketing the glass in a white no one noticed. He had been waiting for over 3 hours, waiting for a flight that wasn't coming, for a life that wouldn't return. No one looked, no one asked. His hands ached from the cold, but his chest ached from something deeper, until a small girl in mismatched boots walked straight up to his blind dog, placed her hand gently on its back, and smiled. Boone, North Carolina was draped in a white silence that morning, the kind of snow that seemed to muffle not just sound but movement, memory, and even time itself. The regional airport, modest but modern, sat quietly on the edge of town, its wide windows now covered in faint trails of melting frost. Snowflakes, thick and lazy, drifted past the glass like falling feathers, blending with the gray sky and the distant outlines of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Inside Gate 3, people waited, murmured, scrolled through phones, but one man remained unusually still. Elliot Moore, 46, sat parked near the floor-to-ceiling window, a sleek black wheelchair, his throne and prison alike. His dark wool coat was tailored, but looked heavy on his thin frame, his once athletic build having faded during the months of immobility. His hair, once a confident salt and pepper sweep, had grown longer and unkempt, like a man too tired to care. Clean-shaven, but his eyes, gray, sharp, held the dull weight of a man who had known empires and now feared reflections. Once, Elliot had been the fire at the center of the tech world, a billionaire before 40. Headlines had called him the mind behind Meridian. But 18 months ago, a private jet had clipped a pine-covered ridge in Montana. The plane had burst into flames. Elliot had survived, but with a crushed spine, smoke-scarred lungs, and a silence that swallowed every phone call, every so-called friend, every boardroom cheer. Beside him, lying still but alert, was Rusty. Rusty was a 6-year-old German shepherd with sable and tan fur, though the tan had dulled slightly into a soft golden brown. His face bore the calm dignity of a soldier who had seen too much and chosen silence over complaint. A brown blindfold, neatly tied behind his ears, covered the space where sight used to be. Rusty had been a K-9 rescue dog, trained for wildfires, avalanches, collapses. He had pulled children out of ash and rubble. He had also been pulled from it himself, blinded by smoke and flame during a rescue operation in Pisgah National Forest 3 years earlier. Since then, he had only trusted one man, Elliot. The terminal was warm, but Elliot felt cold. 3 delays, no movement on the screen. A woman spilled coffee near the snack stand. A baby cried. The world carried on. But when a giggle floated across the waiting area, Elliot looked up. She was small, no older than 6, with curly brown hair that bounced as she spun near the window. Her coat was lilac, patched at the elbow, and her boots didn't match, one pink, one gray. Her cheeks were flushed with the kind of joy that snow gives to children and steals from adults. Her eyes, big, curious, landed on Rusty. She approached cautiously at first, then with wonder. Elliot tensed, prepared to explain or warn. Rusty, despite his blindness, had never liked to be touched without warning. But then the girl knelt, held out her hand without a word, and gently pressed her fingers to Rusty's shoulder. Rusty didn't flinch. He lifted his head, sniffed the air slowly, and let out a low, soft exhale. Then he leaned into her touch. Elliot blinked. "Sorry, Mia, sweetie. Don't touch other people's dogs." The voice came quick, but not harsh. The woman who spoke was in her early 30s, bundled in a thick olive parka. She was tall, with an upright posture that betrayed years of standing in long hospital corridors. Her face, though youthful, carried tiredness beneath the eyes, a weariness that comes from loving deeply and giving too much. Her name was Grace Turner. Grace had been a nurse for nearly a decade, most of it in understaffed rehabilitation units. Her husband had walked out shortly after Mia was born, leaving her with a mortgage, a baby, and a cracked but still beating heart. She had since mastered the art of holding it all together with smiles and second shifts. She approached, holding 2 paper cups and a pink mitt in her teeth. "I'm really sorry," she said, offering an apologetic laugh. "She gets excited around dogs. She thinks every animal wants to be her friend." Elliot shook his head slightly, unsure how to respond. "It's all right," he said. His voice was hoarse, unused. Grace crouched to gently tug Mia's arm. "Come on, baby. Let's not bother the nice man and his dog." "But Mama," Mia whispered, "he's not mad." "Rusty likes me." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Rusty?" "That's his name," Mia answered simply. Elliot blinked again. He hadn't said the dog's name, hadn't spoken it aloud in weeks, and yet she had just known. There was a pause, quiet, not awkward, before Grace smiled, rising again. "Well, she has a way of guessing things she shouldn't know. Gift or curse, depending on the day." Elliot nodded. "You from Boone?" "No, just passing through. Flying to Charlotte to visit my sister. Hopefully." She motioned to the screen that still blinked delayed in bold red letters. "You?" Elliot hesitated, then shrugged. "Home's here now. Bought a place up on Elk Ridge after everything. Was heading to a meeting in Atlanta. Not anymore." Grace's eyes flickered to the wheelchair, to the blindfolded dog, then back to his face. She didn't ask. She didn't pity. Just nodded, like someone who knew the value of silence. Outside, the snow fell thicker now. The loudspeaker crackled. "All flights delayed indefinitely. Weather alert remains in effect." Grace sighed. "That figures." Elliot surprised himself by speaking. "You don't have family to stay with here?" "Number." "Was planning to catch a cab to a cheap motel if it got bad." He looked at Mia, now drawing smiley faces on the window glass, with her finger. Rusty sat beside her, tail tapping the floor like a soft metronome. Then he said it. Not rehearsed, not planned. "I've got a house. It's big, warm, safe, too quiet. You're welcome to wait out the storm there." Grace blinked. "That's kind of you, but no expectations," he added quickly. "Just, I think Rusty would appreciate the company." She hesitated. The protective mother part of her stirred, but something about the man's voice, his honesty, made her pause. Mia tugged at her coat. "Please, Mama. Rusty's house sounds warm." Grace looked into Elliot's face. She saw the loneliness, the sorrow, but also, oddly, the gentleness. The kind you only find in people who've broken and rebuilt more than once. "Okay," she said, "but I'm bringing the hot chocolate." And just like that, 3 strangers, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 small girl, stepped into the snow together. Rusty, ears alert and nose raised to the wind, led the way. The snow had not stopped. By the time Elliot's SUV crunched up the curved driveway leading to the house, Boone was buried in a thick white hush. The moon hung low and swollen, casting a pale silver sheen across the wide fields and the shadowed tree line behind the estate. The tires rolled slowly, deliberately, as if afraid to disturb the stillness that had settled over the land. Elliot's home stood like a relic carved into the landscape. 3 stories of weathered stone and timber, flanked by tall pines and bare maples. Its grandeur was softened by the snow, like an old castle wrapped in gauze. Light spilled from only 2 windows, both on the ground floor. The rest remained dark, like forgotten memories. Grace Turner stepped out of the car first, brushing snow from her parka sleeves and reaching back for her daughter's hand. Her breath formed small clouds in the air, her eyes scanning the house with quiet caution. She was used to hospitals, cramped apartments, rental units with leaky faucets. But this was something else. Mia bounced beside her, her mismatched boots leaving chaotic prints in the powder. Her cheeks were flush pink, curls peeking out from under a too small knitted hat. She clutched Rusty's leash in one hand, though the dog needed no guiding. Rusty moved with eerie certainty across the snow, nose lifted, ears pricked forward, body low to the ground, like a scout on familiar terrain. Elliot, slower, wheeled behind them on the paved stone path, now partially iced over. He had done this stretch 1,000 times alone, but tonight it felt less lonely, less like routine, more like a return. Inside, the air was warm but carried the weight of disuse. The ceiling stretched high above exposed beams, the walls lined with old framed patents, oil paintings, and photographs from a past life, boardrooms, magazine covers, fundraisers with powerful smiles. The living room was vast, with a fireplace taller than Grace, though it had clearly not been lit in months. A leather couch curved around a low coffee table, books stacked neatly in one corner like a museum exhibit nobody touched anymore. Grace removed her boots and helped Mia out of her coat. Her eyes took in everything: the untouched dining room, the dust on the piano, the perfectly folded blanket over the arm of the sofa. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "But quiet." Elliot smiled faintly. "Too quiet. I used to like it that way. Now it just echoes." Mia curled up on the couch instantly, like she'd done it 100 times. Rusty followed without hesitation, curling beside her with his head resting on his front paws, blindfold still in place. "Fireplace works," Elliot said. "I just never use it." Grace knelt to inspect the hearth. The logs were stacked already, perhaps by housekeeping weeks ago, but untouched. She struck a match from her bag and lit it with practiced ease. As flames caught and danced, shadows began to move in the corners of the room. Warmth didn't just come from heat, but from motion, from the flicker of life. "I was a nurse at Southridge Burn Unit for 3 years," she said, settling into the armchair across from Elliot. "Toughest floor in the hospital. Skin grafts, trauma. Sometimes survivors would beg us to stop helping them. That kind of pain, it does something permanent." Elliot's eyes dropped to the burn scars on his own hands, just barely peeking from under his sleeves. Grace caught the motion, but didn't mention it. Instead, she continued, voice calm. "About a year ago, I treated a man. Severe third-degree burns over 50% of his body. Said he got caught in a forest fire, but the story didn't match. No official incident, no news. His file was strange. Pages missing, notes blacked out. I'd never seen anything like it." Elliot looked up. "You think it was covered up?" Grace shrugged, but her gaze sharpened. "I think someone wanted that fire forgotten." Rusty stirred. His ears twitched and he lifted his head slightly, nose twitching in the direction of the fireplace. He stood slowly, moved to the brick hearth, and began gently pawing at the floor. Elliot frowned. He's never done that before. Mia, half asleep, peeked through heavy lashes. "He's looking for something." Rusty scratched again, low and deliberate. Then he laid down, head on the exact spot he'd been pawing. Grace watched. "That's not random." "There's nothing under there," Elliot replied. "That's solid oak floor." But something about the dog's stillness unsettled him. Rusty wasn't agitated, just focused. The kind of focus Elliot had seen during their earliest days together, back when Rusty had still been in therapy for smoke trauma, right after he'd adopted him. That night, the fire crackled gently in the background. Grace moved Mia upstairs to the guest room, simple but clean, with quilted bedding and mountain-themed curtains. She tucked the girl in, whispered promises of safety. Elliot stayed downstairs with Rusty. Later, after the house fell into a hush, Rusty began to pace, not nervously but searchingly. He moved slowly along the walls, nose close to the baseboards. Elliot, from his chair, followed him with his eyes, noting each turn, each pause. The dog stopped near a wall adjacent to the kitchen. He sat, tail twitching. "What is it, boy?" Elliot asked softly. Rusty turned his head toward Elliot's voice but did not move. Instead, he let out a quiet whine. Elliot wheeled forward, leaned in, and noticed a subtle draft, an unevenness where the molding didn't quite align with the baseboard, a panel, a vent. Rusty stood up again, sniffed once more, and lay down directly across the panel, as if guarding it. That night, Elliot barely slept. The house felt different, not haunted, but alive, as if it had been holding its breath for years and tonight had finally exhaled. The frost hadn't lifted. A silver veil still clung to the windows of the house, and the trees in the backyard looked like frozen sculptures. Boone remained still, hushed under the remnants of last night's snowstorm. But inside Elliot Moore's home, the stillness had shifted. No longer the silence of luxury, but of something waiting to be discovered. That morning, Elliot wheeled Rusty into the back of his SUV with a quiet sense of purpose. The dog, wrapped in his usual fleece blanket, lay calm but alert. His blindfold was freshly tied. A deep brown cloth knotted behind his ears, but his ears were constantly moving, twitching toward every new sound. Grace stood on the porch, arms crossed in her thick parka, watching the SUV reverse into the drive. "Text me when you get there," she said, "and let me know if he needs sedation." "I will," Elliot nodded, giving a soft pat to Rusty's side. "I just want answers." The veterinary clinic sat on the outskirts of town, nestled near the wooded hills that wrapped around Boone like quiet sentinels. Dr. Angela Reeves, a woman in her early 40s with cropped red hair and pale skin, greeted them at the door. She wore a green fleece vest over navy scrubs and had the quick, fluid movements of someone who was always half a step ahead of her own to-do list. "Good to see you again, Elliot," she said, glancing down at Rusty. "He's still quiet as ever?" "Unless he smells gasoline," Elliot replied. "Then he's a different dog." Angela raised an eyebrow but said nothing, simply ushered them into a back room lined with clean steel counters and organized shelves of instruments. Rusty was calm throughout the scan. Angela waved the chip reader over his shoulder blades, waiting for the familiar beep. The screen on her monitor lit up. She frowned slightly, scrolling through the data. "This is interesting," she murmured. Elliot leaned forward. "What?" "He was microchipped by the National K-9 Emergency Task Force 3 years ago, deployed to Pisgah National Forest during a fire operation. That fire," she paused, looking up at Elliot, "was widely reported as lightning-related. Total loss. Thousands of acres, dozens injured. But here's the thing. There are no closing notes. Normally, these chips log exit scans, debriefs. Rusty's case just stops." Elliot's brows furrowed. "So they didn't log him out?" Angela shook her head. "Either it was sloppy paperwork, or someone didn't want the record completed." She clicked to another screen. "Also, you said gasoline. According to this behavior note, Rusty was treated briefly for chemical exposure consistent with accelerants. That's not something you find in a natural wildfire." Elliot's voice lowered. "You're saying it might have been arson?" Angela shrugged. "I'm saying there are questions no one answered." On the drive home, Elliot sat in silence. Rusty rested his head. On Elliot's leg, blindfolded eyes calm, but breathing shallow. The snow had started again, light but persistent. Clouds hung low over Boone, as if the mountains themselves were watching. Back at the house, Grace had kept Mia busy with puzzles and sketching. But by late afternoon, the girl had grown restless. She wandered through the main hallway, tugging open cabinet doors with the wide-eyed curiosity only 6-year-olds possess. That's when she found it. Behind a large, old wooden cabinet near the base of the stairs, dusty, untouched, Mia spotted a corner of fabric poking out between the boards. She tugged gently. It didn't resist much. "Mom!" she called, holding up the dirty piece of cloth. Grace rushed over. The fabric was thick, canvas-like. One edge had been burned, blackened and frayed, and there was a faded patch sewn into it, the symbol of the K-9 Emergency Response Unit. Elliot, who had just returned, rolled into the room as Grace held it up. Rusty, now lying near the fireplace, lifted his head, ears pointed toward the cloth. Then, slowly, he stood. His nose quivered. He walked toward Mia with slow, deliberate steps, and when he reached her, he lowered his head and let out a low, quiet whine. Elliot stared at the fabric, then at Rusty. "Where did you find this?" Mia pointed toward the cabinet. "It was stuck behind. It smelled like fire." Rusty sat beside Mia, pressing gently against her leg. He didn't move again. Elliot took the cloth in his hands. The burned edge still held a faint trace of smoke, buried beneath time and wood and dust. But to Rusty, it might as well have been yesterday. That night, Rusty stood motionless for hours in front of the locked basement door. The sky above Boone had turned a dull pewter by late morning. The frost from the previous night clung to every branch and rooftop like stubborn memories refusing to melt. Inside the stone and timber walls of Elliot Moore's home, that same feeling of frozen memory lingered, especially near the basement door where Rusty now stood, unmoving for the 3rd morning in a row. He didn't bark or scratch. He simply stood, head slightly lowered, nose lifted toward the faintest draft leaking through the baseboard. He stood like he was waiting for someone, or something, to answer him back. Grace, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea, watched with growing unease. Her auburn hair was pulled back messily, the creases under her eyes deeper than usual. She looked tired, not the kind of tired sleep could fix, but the kind born from a gut feeling that the past was reaching forward. Elliot rolled in from the hallway, his hands tight on the wheels of his chair. He hasn't moved from that spot since 5 a.m. I noticed, Grace replied. It's not just memory anymore, it's instinct. He's trying to tell us something. She moved closer, crouched beside the dog, and placed a gentle hand on his back. Rusty didn't react, but his tail gave a single, low flick. Elliot, she said carefully, can we talk in private? They stepped into the sitting room, where the fireplace had been long since reduced to embers. Grace sat on the edge of the couch, fingers knotted around her mug. I've been thinking about someone I treated at South Ridge last year, she said. A burn victim, 3rd degree over half his body. Said he was caught in a backdraft during a forest fire, but the story had holes. No incident report, no media coverage. When I tried to follow up through the system, his file was gone, completely wiped, like he never existed. Elliot looked at her, eyes narrowing. You think he was the one with Rusty during the fire? I didn't at first, she said. But the more I remember his voice, the more I think I was wrong. Did he ever mention the dog? No, she said, but he had a scar on his forearm. A bite. I assumed it was from the fire. Now I'm not so sure. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Elliot wheeled to the foyer as Grace followed. A man stood on the porch, wearing a brown delivery uniform, his head low under a wool beanie. In his arms was a small box, plain and unmarked. Rusty, lying by the fireplace, shot to his feet. The growl came before anyone could speak, low, deep, and unmistakable. The man looked up. Elliot noticed the skin immediately, scarred across the lower right jaw and up his neck. He had the hollow cheeks of someone who had burned from the inside out. His eyes were sharp, gray, unsettled. He held the box tighter when he saw Rusty. Grace stepped forward. You. The man froze. Ma'am, you were at South Ridge. He licked his lips, eyes darting between them. I'm just the delivery guy. Got a package from Mr. Moore. Rusty barked then, a single piercing note, and charged toward the door. Elliot barely had time to throw the brake on his chair. Rusty, he called, but the dog didn't stop. He slammed against the doorframe, not in rage, but in recognition. The man stumbled back, dropping the box onto the porch before turning on his heel and fleeing down the steps. Elliot opened the door too late. By the time he reached the edge of the porch, the man had vanished down the road. The box remained. Grace picked it up carefully. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, folded once. Elliot unfolded it. The message was typed. Don't dig up the past. You have no idea what Rusty saw. Some things are better left in ash. There was no signature. That night, Elliot sat with the letter under a reading lamp, the edges curling slightly from the heat of his fingers. Rusty lay beside him, breathing slow, but not asleep. He knows, Elliot whispered. He's trying to lead us back. By morning, the storm had cleared. The sun lit the pines in long, golden slants. The air was sharp, cold enough to bite the skin, but the snow had begun to soften. Elliot bundled up, tucking the note into his coat pocket. He strapped a small GPS unit onto Rusty's collar, more out of caution than necessity. Grace insisted on going with them. We follow him, she said, adjusting her hiking boots. Wherever he wants to go. Rusty didn't hesitate. As soon as they stepped outside, he began walking, nose up, body low, each step certain. He led them past the tree line, down the old hunting trail behind Elliot's property, and deeper into the woods. After almost an hour, they reached it, a small cabin, half-rotted, hidden behind a stand of tall spruce. The roof had partially caved, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. A rusted metal sign lay half-buried in snow. Unit Bravo, Fire Staging Point. Elliot felt his heart stop. Grace gently pushed open the door. Inside, everything smelled of char and rot. Rusty stepped inside without hesitation. He moved to a corner, sniffed, then sat. There, half burned, were several file folders. The edges were blackened, the words faint, but still visible. Photos, incident maps, a roster of names. One document, charred but intact, had a header. Controlled burn cover operation. Pisgah, October 3rd, classified. Elliot picked it up, fingers trembling. Rusty lay beside him, tail still, ears perked. He had remembered the way. Sunlight returned to Boone like a whispered apology after days of silence. It streamed through the tall windows of Elliot Moore's home, illuminating the dust in golden rays and warming the slate floor beneath Rusty's paws. Snow still clung stubbornly to the edges of the roof, but inside, the air had shifted, from the stillness of isolation to the gentle chaos of life returning. 2 days had passed since Elliot, Grace, and Rusty uncovered the half-burned documents in the forest cabin. Elliot had contacted Boone police the next morning, not with dramatic claims, but with quiet determination. A young detective named Austin Weller had answered the door. Weller was in his early 30s, lean and sharp-jawed, with sandy brown hair cropped short, and the posture of someone who hadn't yet been jaded by years of bureaucracy. He wore a black wool coat over his uniform and carried a plain leather notebook. His tone was calm but skeptical, until he saw the documents. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured, turning over one of the charred pages on Elliot's dining table. "These are state-issued forms, no question. If they're real, we're looking at suppressed operations, possibly criminal negligence." He looked at Rusty, who sat nearby, motionless save for the slow flick of his tail. "This the dog that found them?" Grace nodded. "He led us right to it, like he'd never forgotten the smell of where they tried to bury the truth." Weller didn't laugh. He simply said, "I'll open a file." Quietly for now. And so, the investigation began again. By the end of the week, news had already begun to trickle out. An anonymous leak, Elliot suspected the delivery man turned arsonist, trying to protect himself, had reached local media. One headline read, "Blind Dog Uncovers Secrets of Forest Fire That Wasn't Accidental." The photo they used was a candid one, Rusty sitting on the porch, brown blindfold neatly tied, the trees behind him bare and solemn. Beneath it, they called him the dog who remembered. Rusty, of course, remained indifferent to fame. He only wagged his tail when Mia came home from school, or when Elliot brushed behind his ears just right. But Elliot watched as something began to soften in the town's voice. He received letters, strangers, veterans, former rescue workers, thanking him. Not for the discovery, but for believing in a dog no one else had thought to ask. One afternoon, just as the sun began to slip behind the hills, Elliot rolled into the living room to find Mia painting. She sat cross-legged on the rug, a canvas propped in front of her, tongue between her teeth in concentration. Her cheeks were smudged with watercolor, and a palette balanced precariously on the coffee table. Grace stood nearby, arms crossed, smiling faintly. She looked more at ease these days. Her dark hair was looser, her laughter less guarded. She had stopped jumping at every unexpected knock. Mia held up the finished piece. The painting was simple, but full of heart. A blindfolded German shepherd, standing at the edge of a snowy forest. Behind him, a man in a wheelchair, hands lifted in trust. And in the lower corner, a child holding both their shadows together like threads of light. At the bottom, Mia had written in looping handwriting, "He didn't need eyes. He just needed to be believed." Elliot didn't speak. He couldn't. Instead, he wheeled forward, took Grace's hand, and held it with a quiet conviction. "I have something to ask," he said, voice steady but low. Grace turned, eyebrows raised. "I spent most of my life thinking people had to be perfect. I thought love was a transaction, earned, managed, controlled." He looked over at Rusty, who lay curled beside the fire. "But that dog taught me something. That loyalty doesn't ask for explanations. That family doesn't have to match. It just has to show up." He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small box, velvet-wrapped and worn at the edges. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Grace Turner," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring engraved with pine branches. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, silence again. Only the soft pop of the fire and Mia's quiet intake of breath. Then Grace whispered, Yes. God, yes. Mia squealed and wrapped her arms around them both, giggling. Rusty raised his head at the noise, tail thumping the rug twice in approval. The wedding was small, private. Just a few weeks later, on a soft December morning, they stood beneath the same bare pines behind the house, the snow now patchy with thaw. Elliot wore a navy jacket and charcoal scarf, sitting proudly in his chair. Grace wore a dark green coat and carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers. Mia was the flower girl, though she threw pine cones instead of petals, and Rusty, in a soft woolen vest, stood between them like a sentinel, like a witness, like family. Later that evening, Elliot called Mia into his study. He had framed her painting and hung it above the fireplace, beside an old black and white photograph of Rusty from his service days. "I want you to know something," he said, pulling her close. "You don't have to be my daughter by blood. You already are by love. But if you'd like, I'd like to make it official." Mia blinked up at him, her eyes round. "Like adoption?" He nodded. She didn't speak, just threw her arms around him and whispered, "Yes." That night, as snow began to fall again softly, Elliot stood at the window and watched the forest in the distance. He no longer feared what it hid. He had a family, and a dog who never saw, but always knew the way home. Sometimes the ones who guide us home aren't the ones who speak the loudest or see the farthest, but the ones who stay, who remember, who love us unconditionally, even in silence. Rusty didn't have eyes, but he had memory. He had faith. And through him, a broken man found healing. A little girl found her forever family. And a secret long buried in ash found its way into the light. Maybe that's the miracle God sends us, not in thunder or fire, but in quiet loyalty, in unexpected companionship, in the way love returns when we least deserve it, but need it most. Just like Rusty, sometimes we don't need perfect sight. We just need to be believed. And sometimes that's where the healing begins. If you believe in second chances, if you believe God can work through even the most broken of lives, then this story is for you. Drop a comment and type "Amen" if you believe in quiet miracles. Tell us, has an animal ever changed your life in a way you couldn't explain? Share this video with someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that heal the heart. And may God bless you and your family with the love, strength, and quiet guidance you didn't know you needed, but He always knew.